This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Welcome to Justice Pending, the podcast where we unravel the twists and turns of cases that leave us with more questions than answers. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan. And today we're heading to Maypearl, Texas, a small town with a big mystery.
Yes, a devoted husband, a chilling 911 call, a missing murder weapon, and a Google search that's basically a blueprint for murder.
Yeah, it's not exactly subtle.
Sandra Garner says a masked intruder killed her husband, but did she make him up?
Or was there really someone lurking in the dark that night? Let's set the scene. It's just past midnight on January 2nd, 2018. Sandra Garner dials 911. She's panicked, telling the operator her husband, Jon, has been shot in their home.
When police arrive, they find Sandra shaking, leading them straight to Jon's body. She says she was woken up by 2 gunshots and saw a masked man standing over her.
And here's where things get weird. The man supposedly tells Sandra he used to work for Jon, that Jon fired him, ruining his life. Then instead of shooting her, he makes her hand over $18,000 from a safe and orders her to count to 100 before calling for help.
Yeah, this is where it gets very weird because, I was a producer for 48 Hours on CBS and looked into this case. And I remember as soon as we got to what the alleged intruder, was supposed to have said, we were all like red flags, because if someone is committing a murder, the idea that they're going to start to have this lengthy conversation, uh, it doesn't make any sense. It's like way too detailed. And the idea that he, had come up, he tells the wife his motivation for killing her husband. Like, people don't just hand over motives like that.
Yeah,
So
seems a little too easy.
yeah, it was very specific and to the point. And then the idea that she was supposed to count to 100 before calling for help. I mean, I can't imagine getting all the way to 100. I feel like I would get to like 10 and then I'd be booking it.
Yeah, I feel like you see that in the movies, right? Go count, like they think 100's a magic number to give them time to run away. If indeed there was this masked intruder, having this conversation. The whole thing sounds a little fishy. It sounds like she pulled from a movie.
Yeah, it does kind of have a movie script quality, and I think she was like supposed to stand in their closet
Oh,
while she counted to 100 because that's where the safe was. And so it was this whole like step 1, step 2, step 3 um and yeah, it just really stood out as that's not what happens when someone breaks into your house to kill your husband. They do it and they get out of there as fast as possible. Sure, they might try to steal some money if it's available, but I mean, this is very extra.
it is. And you'd have to also know that there's a safe in the house, and B, that safe contains money. So the knowledge, even going into it's a little strange to have.
Oh, it totally is because this is supposed to be a former employee. Like the idea that we tell people that we work with
Yeah.
or, our subordinates, people reporting to us. By the way, I keep a safe in my bedroom closet and it usually has about 18 grand in it. I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't,
It's
this
like a
is not,
strange.
this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, but let's continue because,
Yes. Yes. Okay. So Sandra follows these instructions to a T.
according to
She
her.
counts, yeah, according to her, she counts as fast as she can, all the way to 100, and then she calls 911.
Okay, so she's not one Mississippiing this. Okay. So when the police get to the house, they search the house. They, of course, are looking for forced entry. They don't find any, no footprints, and no trace of this alleged intruder.
Right. So that's suspicious because this is supposed to be, a home invasion.
Mhm.
And right off the bat, they realize something is missing.
Yeah, John's 38 caliber revolver, the same exact caliber used to kill him.
So the murder weapon has disappeared, right? It is not a gun that the intruder brought with him. This is John's own revolver. So that's special because, again, you have someone breaking into your home, leaving no trace, and not bringing their own weapon, using the weapon of the victim, which did they know that that was in the house? Did they know where he kept it? All very unlikely. It reminds me of Michelle Williams' case where
Mhm.
she initially claimed that an intruder had shot her husband with his own gun and then later said, that he had committed suicide and we know um the whole convoluted case with Michelle Williams, but it starts the same way as the Jon Garner case.
Yeah, it reminded me of it, that opening scene where, she's calling and crying and shaking and, yes, it's a dramatic scene, just like
Yes.
her
Yes.
case.
So here, once again, we have a breathless account to 911 about a masked intruder who is shot, um, the victim's husband. So
Mhm,
it's,
and, hearing the alleged intruder's voice. So in Michelle Williams, it was he had a thick country accent, talked
yeah.
to her, and now here it's a motive plus instructions to count. So
You're
it's
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
That is interesting because in other cases that I've known that have been verified to be home invasions, I've never heard of this level of detail. But in these two cases, there is that detail. So but nevertheless, police, when they initially arrive on scene, they're operating as though the information they are getting from Sandra, the victim's wife, is accurate. And so the first person they look at is Sandra's son,
Huh.
Wes. He was one of the last people to see John alive, and he, had had some scrapes with the law in the past. And so he is their first person of interest, we'll say. And one of the first things that he says is actually that he thinks his mom might have done it.
Huh. Now, when you say Sandra's son, does that mean this is not John's son?
Correct. Previous relationship.
Okay. So he's shouting, "Happy New Year, mom. I think you're a murderer." I mean, that's his first go-to, that his own mother has done this.
Right. This is a complicated family dynamic for sure. So, the case takes a huge turn at this point, and they're no longer just looking at Wes, they start looking at Sandra.
Hmm.
And the police search Sandra's electronic devices and uncover something chilling.
Yeah, this is it's a red flag, I'd say. She actually did a Google search for quote, "how to kill someone and not get caught."
Yeah, it's right there in black and white on her iPad. So that right there is pretty damning evidence that this was premeditated and that the person who did the search is likely, the person who pulled the trigger. Now, we'll put a pin in that and come back to it because who might have searched on the iPad is something that comes is up for debate.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Just because it's her personal iPad doesn't mean she picked it up and searched that.
correct. So not only did someone search for how to kill someone and not get caught, there were also searches for how to kill someone in their sleep and the drug fentanyl.
Okay, so clearly someone didn't know how to use incognito mode or clear search
Correct.
history.
Yeah,
I mean,
they were not covering their tracks. This was all just right there in the browser history.
and she just handed over the iPad, or the police just took it as part of the investigation.
Right. Once someone's been murdered in the house, you have no right to privacy. So anything in that house is subject to police investigation. They're allowed to seize everything inside of a house or inside of a property where a murder has occurred.
Okay, does that extend to maybe your vehicle that belongs to the house that's registered at the house?
Yeah, if the vehicle's on the property, I believe it does. They might have to get a separate search warrant, but it's like everything is on pause. Like she's not allowed to go, into her vehicle at that time, like until they get that warrant, specifically for the vehicle. Um Everything, that's where the crime scene tape comes up, right? And it's
Right.
just to preserve the scene until all the proper paperwork can be filed and they can examine all the evidence.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because that night the police do search Sandra's car, but they don't find anything. So, okay, so they search the house, they search the car, nothing.
Correct. So they're looking for this murder weapon. That's the number one thing they're looking for. It stands to reason if the killer came without a gun, used the victim's gun, would they take it with them or would they also leave it at the house? So that's really what police are narrowing in on. Where could this gun be?
Right. So, surprisingly though, 3 days later, boom, they find it. They find the missing 38 caliber revolver and it's wrapped in plastic under the driver's seat of Sandra's Mustang, the same car they had already searched 3 days prior to the night of the murder.
Correct, and Sandra insists that she didn't put it in there, and I've always been fascinated by the fact that the gun was wet whenever they found it.
Huh.
That was just like a kind of a throwaway detail when I was going through, documents in this case that the gun was wet, but to me, the family had a pool. There was a pool on the property, and I've always wondered if the gun was stashed in the pool when police were searching,
Like the
the
skimmer
area, the
basket?
filter area?
Yeah, like a skimmer basket. Yeah.
Exactly. I've
Yeah.
always thought that the gun was in the skimmer basket, and that's why the police didn't find it, that's why the dogs didn't alert on it. It was in
Uh-huh.
chlorine, it was in water, and it was
Uh-huh.
hidden,
Uh-huh.
and then I think once police left, um, the killer took the gun out of that location and moved it to a second location, which was under the driver's seat of Sandra's Mustang.
It's so interesting to me that the police would even have circled back to her car after giving it the all clear that first night.
Yeah, what I seem to recall is that there might have been a tip that was called in about the gun possibly still being on the property. I can't remember exactly, but that's kind of my hunch is that someone had called in a tip. And this happens a lot in cases like this where there was a lot of press about this. People call in anonymous tips, and a lot of times they're not worth anything, but sometimes they are.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly, whatever the reason,
Yeah.
it worked out in the case's favor because they found the gun. They found the
That's
missing gun.
that's right. Yes. So once they found that murder weapon in Sandra's car, shortly after that, she was arrested and charged with John's murder, and she sat in jail for 21 months awaiting trial. She was not able to get out on bond in all that time.
Wow. I mean, I assume she had pled not guilty and said, "Oh, I didn't put the gun there. It wasn't
Correct.
me," and all that. Okay.
Yes, she pled not guilty, and the family really divided into two camps: people who thought Sandra was innocent and those who thought she was guilty. And so it was a really tense time, for the Garner family. And it was just sort of unbelievable that they could end up in this situation. I've spoken to multiple members of John's family, and they're still devastated to this day that um, that this is what happened, to their loved one, and that it potentially was at the hands of his own wife.
Yeah. So that, by the time she got her day in court, I mean, you went to that trial, right? Like
Correct.
things
Yeah, I
didn't look.
sat I sat in that trial. It was in Ellis County, which is, outside of Dallas, and it was an unbelievable trial. It definitely was not as clear cut, as it appeared on first blush whenever, we were looking over the documents and seeing the initial reporting. The court case got pretty interesting.
Hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing that you had this firsthand view into it.
Yeah, so it was really one of those cases where you're just shaking your head. You cannot believe the mistakes that police made.
Wow.
And it was so unfortunate because, right off the bat, the police lost crucial crime scene photos.
How do you lose photos?
So, unfortunately, the sheriff's deputy who was tasked with taking photos was using his flip phone, Susan.
Oh,
So he's using his flip phone to take these photos, and for whatever reason, they ended up not making it to the computer. They were lost.
wow.
So the initial photos, the very first photos that were taken were lost. So they went back and took photos hours later.
Mhm.
And in the following days, they took, additional photos, but the defense really hammered home the fact that the earliest photos, the initial crime scene photos were all lost. And what could that mean? What could be on those photos? What could have happened in the hours between when the first photos were taken and the next set were taken? That's huge. That's very crucial evidence, and that's police work 101.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, first you have no signs of forced entry, no footprints, and then
Right.
boom, people parading through the house. Now you got footprint. I mean, it's very messy.
Yes. And on top of that, they didn't immediately bag Sandra's hands for gunshot residue. Whenever she called 911 and they arrived on the scene, that should have been step one, that they put those bags on her hands the second they realized this was a shooting and she was in the house with the victim. But instead, they let her like roll around on the couch. She's crying. So tears are getting, on her hands.
Mm,
Um, and they didn't bag them, right away. So there was time that went on, and that the GSR test is really time dependent, and the idea that they wasted, that crucial time and they didn't bag it right away. That was another thing that was an error in the case and just unfortunately sloppy police work.
wow.
So even though they had ballistics proving that that gun, the 38 caliber revolver, was the murder weapon, they weren't able to prove who pulled the trigger.
They never did
Because
fingerprint
yeah,
analysis or that wasn't enough
the
there.
gun was wet. Yeah, there was
Oh, the gun
nothing
was
on the
wet.
gun,
Yes, of
and they didn't
course.
bag Sandra's hands right away. So
Oh,
her GSR test, comes back negative, and yeah, it's they can't prove who pulled the trigger, which is a very important part of a murder case.
well, sure. And knowing all this, it's no surprise that then Sandra takes the stand, which is something most defendants are advised not to do.
Correct. And I still remember, whenever the judge asked, will the defendant in this case take the stand? And she says yes. And
Mm,
she, the this always happens outside the presence of the jury, the initial um conversation between the judge and the defense attorney and the defendant to learn if they're going to take the stand. And then if they do take the stand, what happens is the defense will say, we now call the defendant, Sandra Garner, to the stand. And because she doesn't have to go, right? That's your right. You have a right not to testify. Um, you have a right to remain silent, the Fifth Amendment, right? One of the most important
mhm.
rights that we have as Americans. And so she has the right to remain silent, but she decides to take the stand. And whenever she got up to make that very short but very important walk to the witness stand, you could have heard a pin drop.
I'm
People,
sure.
yeah, could not believe that she was going to speak. And we were going to get to hear from her, not just on police body cam videos, but we were going to get to hear from her face to face in the same room.
Wow, I bet the jury loved that actually.
Yeah, juries do really enjoy hearing from the defendant. It kind of feels like, okay, we're getting the best evidence that we possibly can. We're getting to actually determine for ourselves if we think this person's truthful.
Mhm.
And so, she gets on the stand. She tells the jury that she loved John, that she relied on him completely, and that she had no reason to kill him.
Okay, I mean, sure.
Yeah.
That sounds like what you would say if you were saying you were innocent. Um,
Right. And, she was no longer working. He was the sole provider in the family. And so that part kind of checks out. Of course, there was a life insurance policy. Of course, he had, retirement, 401k. They had
mhm,
their house. There were lots of assets that she, was now inheriting. But
mhm.
as far as anyone knowing that they had like problems in their relationship or an affair, nothing was ever proven to that effect. So it was very much a happy relationship as far as anyone knew. No one knew of troubles like that.
Right.
So that in a lot of these cases, there are allegations of infidelity or fighting or physical violence. And in this one, there just weren't.
Wow. Well, she must have put on a compelling argument for herself because the jury only deliberated for 3 hours.
Yes, and so usually a quick verdict is in favor of the prosecution. Usually a quick verdict means guilty. But in this case, the jury came back and said not guilty.
I mean, wow. I mean, that is so many shockers in this case, that go
Yes.
against the usual, how these cases usually go.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the courtroom was stunned. People, you go through all, the rigor of a trial, of evidence, testimony, and people expect a conviction, especially when you have that iPad search,
Yeah.
that says how to kill someone in their sleep, how to get away with murder and not get caught, right? But she was able to say that a lot of people use that iPad, including her son, Wes,
Huh.
that it was sort of the house iPad, that it was out, that it was unlocked, there was no passcode, and anyone in their family or friends could have searched that on the iPad. So it was her iPad. It was under her user ID, it was her iPad. However, that was how she got around that very damning piece of evidence.
Hmm. And so, right. So so Wes lived with them or at least had access to the house.
Yeah, he lived in his own apartment, but he came, to the house often and he'd been to the house in recent days. So that was plausible, I guess.
Hmm.
Again,
Uh,
he doesn't have a motive to kill his stepfather. He's
right.
not a beneficiary on any of, in the will, in the business, in a life insurance policy. So why would he want him dead? It
Right.
didn't make a lot of sense.
Right. So, okay. So Sandra is found not guilty. Did she have any idea of who it might be or who would want to have murdered her husband?
She has basically, fingered Wes. She has
Oh,
also said yeah,
it's a two-way street in this family.
it
Amazing.
is. It is. So she has said that she believed it could be her son. She has also said that she thinks could be a former employee. The Texas Rangers got involved in this case. They went through all the employment records. They looked for alternate suspects. Um, Nothing came to pass from that. They didn't find any viable suspects that didn't have an alibi for the night of the murder, that weren't, far away. Because even though they lived in Maypearl, his business, I can't remember the name of the exact town, but it wasn't located in Maypearl. So employees were not living around their house. By the way, Wes had an alibi. He was watching Netflix. He was
Oh,
logged into his Netflix account. So that's his alibi that he was home watching Netflix.
and we
And so
all
that,
have gotten that, "Are you still watching?"
correct.
notification. So if that was, turned off or never,
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty, I would say that's
Police
pretty
felt that
telling.
that was enough. They felt
Yeah.
that his alibi, checked out.
Yeah.
So that's why,
Also,
Sandra was charged among other things and not Wes.
right, but also, okay, so we have this alleged conversation. If you're going to put the blame on your own son, don't you recognize his voice? I mean,
That
that's
came
strange.
up. Yeah, that definitely came up. She said, that she thought he might have been disguising his voice. Oh gosh, this was unbelievable. So I'm remembering this detail now. So Sandra said that the killer was wearing like a dark blue Under Armour hoodie whenever she, encountered them during the shooting. And when Wes testified, I kid you not, he wore a dark blue Under Armour hoodie.
Ugh.
And it was just like, "Oh gosh, did no one tell him to check his wardrobe," right?
Well,
Um,
no, it sounds to me more like it was something he often wore, and his mother knew that and was setting up to frame him.
that's an excellent point, Susan. That's an excellent point.
I know
So,
exactly. I mean, don't you
yeah,
know, like, you see the same people. There's only
yeah,
so many things, especially a guy. I mean, no offense to
yeah,
men out there, but
yeah,
I feel like we all have our things on rotation.
we
So,
do.
that's maybe she said, "Oh, wear that in court." Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, they definitely weren't on speaking terms at this
Oh,
point,
true, true.
but it was noticeable to me whenever I saw him take the stand in that outfit. I was just like, "Oh man,
Yeah.
this
Wow.
doesn't look good."
Wow. Well, I think, the big issue in the case so this is unsolved then?
Correct. Yes. So
Okay.
Sandra walks free, and her a lot of her family members have supported her. John's family does not think that she's actually innocent. They believe the evidence, especially the gun and those Google searches, point right to her. And they have been very vocal about the fact that they think that the jury got it wrong.
Well, sure. I mean, it's definitely still a possibility that they did. Um, and the police never followed other suspects after
So the
this.
case is still open. I have talked to investigators, and they have told me that the case is open, and if any new evidence comes in, they will investigate it. They, off the record, do believe that they've already solved it. They think that Sandra Garner is the killer. That was you know, a lot of times in law enforcement, if they lose a case, they'll say, it's not that the person's innocent in their eyes; it's that the case wasn't proven.
Uh-huh.
And so that's, in America, you only get one shot when you take someone to trial. There's something called double jeopardy. You cannot be tried for the same murder twice if you're acquitted. So if
Mhm.
it was a hung jury, she could be taken back to trial. If she's found guilty, she can appeal and actually be found innocent. But if a jury has a unanimous verdict and you are not guilty of that murder, then you can never be convicted. She could actually confess today and never be convicted of that murder. Is she is free. So now, are there other charges? A wrongful death suit. There could be I've seen, attempts to get people with like abuse of a corpse, other things you could try. But as far as murder, um, she will never have to face another trial for the murder of her husband, Jon Garner.
Wow. Okay, well, listeners, what do you think? Let us know your theories or if you have other cases you'd like us to explore.
Yeah. We would love to hear from you. And, we have been getting messages and emails from listeners about cases that they want us to look into, and they are on our list. We will get to them. So thank you so much for sending those in, and go to justicepending.com and tell us your thoughts, and we will do our best to look into all of these cases. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.